A or B?
That was the starting point of our investigation, a ticking bomb scenario.
Left or right?
Any suspect in any case, we regard him as our key witness.
Yes or no?
Today we force our detectives to construct all plausible alternative explanations.
Welcome to The Art of Deciding with Bruce Whitfield.
Hello, I'm Bruce Whitfield and welcome to The Art of Deciding, the podcast where we speak to people about the choices they make and the thinking behind them. We're trying to understand more about the decision-making process. Sometimes those decisions need to be made because of the terrible choices made by other people.
I was on holidays with my family, with my children, and then we got the news that our government building in our capital, Oslo, was blown up by a huge bomb.
On the 22nd of July 2011, Norway was rocked by what seemed to be a terrorist attack right at its centre. Police Superintendent Asbjørn Rachlew was one of those watching in horror as the events unfolded.
And we sat to the television and took it all in and couldn't really comprehend and believe it. You know, Oslo, Norway is a peaceful country, but our capital was turned into a war zone.
It's almost impossible to keep watching. Eventually, Asbjorn realizes that his children just need to go outside. Maybe they should all get some air. Perhaps that will make them feel better.
So I remember walking down towards the lake in Telemark. But as I walked, cars were stopping, because they know me in the village. And they said, "Had you heard about it?" And I said, yes, I heard about the bomb. It's terrible. No, it's more. It's more.
That July afternoon, after deciding to detonate a deadly bomb in the centre of Oslo, a bomb which killed 8 people and injured 209, 32-year-old Norwegian Anders Breivk, wearing a fake police uniform, travelled 23 miles northwest to the island of Utøya, where the country's Labour Party was holding its annual summer children's camp. He boarded the ferry, showed his fake ID to the crew, and on landing, calmly walked through the leafy paths, shooting everyone he saw. By the end of the afternoon, 32 more people will be injured and 69 more will be dead, 38 of them under the age of 20. Breivik was arrested straight away, but it didn't end there.
10 minutes into the first interview on the island, Anders Breivk took advantage of the situation he had created and threatened us and threatened the nation. He said, "What you have seen here today and in Oslo earlier today is not the operation. It's just firecrackers compared to what will happen. Terrorist cell 2 and 3 will activate anytime." That was the starting point of our investigation, a ticking bomb scenario.
So the police must decide if Breivik is telling the truth about that and what to do next. But surely they don't have to decide whether or not he's guilty. He's holding the guns. He was captured on the scene. But it's not quite as clear-cut as you think.
Despite that the accused has acknowledged the actual circumstances, he has not pleaded guilty.
He acknowledges that he did do all of the killing, but he pleads not guilty. He says it was necessary.
He needed to carry out these acts in order to save Norway and Western Europe from, among other things, cultural Marxism and Muslim takeover.
Anders Breivik's own twisted decision-making process must be interrogated, and Norway's police force is one of the most forward-thinking interrogators in the world.
I was called up by one of our commissioners and she asked me if I could come in. And she asked me to supervise the interviews of Breivik. And the commissioner just told me one thing. She said, "Asbjorn, can you take on the role as a supervisor and ensure that everything is done exactly by the book?" And as I drove through the woods of Norway and approaching the capital, of course, I listened to the radio. And the government was responding. In particular, I remember very well our foreign minister Today, the Prime Minister in Norway, Jonas Gahr Støre, he said that Norway tomorrow will be recognizable. Nobody can take from us our values or our democracy. So in that way, I started to mentally prepare myself. What are our values? And luckily, the Norwegian police, 10 years prior to the terror attacks, we, as the second country in the world, we introduced investigative interviewing in our country, in which we ended our experience-based, confession-driven approach to interrogations to the more research-based investigative interviewing techniques.
Research-based investigative interviewing techniques. What are they exactly? Well, they came from someone making, or nearly making, the wrong decision. 16 years before Anders Breivk went on his terrible killing spree, there was another case that shocked Norway. The murder of the beautiful 17-year-old Birgitte Tengs in her hometown of Kopervik. The police worked tirelessly for 2 years to find her killer, but got nowhere.
Can you imagine working on a project for 2 years and not getting anywhere, with pressure from the media, pressure from the whole society? We become vulnerable decision makers. Just the thought of finding a solution becomes psychologically attractive, So my colleagues got a suspicion towards a young man and they arrested him, knowing very well that they needed more evidence if he were to be convicted. And then the interrogations of this young boy started for hours after hours, days after days, weeks after weeks. After 180 hours of interrogations, the young boy confessed to the murder of Birgitte. This was a confession he retracted quite soon after, but he had signed the police statement, and he was convicted. But he appealed the case, and in the appeal case, the defense lawyers brought in Professor Gisle Gudjonsson from the United Kingdom. He was then, and still is, regarded as one of the leading experts in the world on police interrogations and investigative interviewing. And then he stood up, the professor, in the court and came with heavily criticism towards the Norwegian police. He said that in this case, the police have used manipulative, confession-orientated interrogation techniques. And he looked at the jury and he said, if you don't have other evidence, you must be careful because this confession, it can be false. I remember very well how we reacted to this professor.
Asbjørn Rachlew did more than get over his skepticism. He immersed himself in the information and became an authority on and a pioneer of research-based interviewing techniques in Norway and the world. The more he learned, the more flaws he could see in traditional forensic decision-making processes.
When I started to read the global literature on the topic, I then realized that there are many things that can go wrong. We call them the immediate causes. It could be a false confession. It could be a witness that identifies someone who is innocent. It could be a laboratory conclusion that is erred, etc. But what we find in every case we study is the underlying cause to wrongful convictions and errors of justice is what we call confirmation bias or tunnel vision, if you like. And then when I realized that, a new world again opened up, the knowledge of decision-making theory. Then we started to read and, of course, develop methodology that stimulate us to operationalize the presumption of innocence. And let me explain. Let's say a woman has been murdered and your fingerprints is on her bed all over. You are apprehended and you say, I've never been to that apartment in my life. I have never seen that woman. I am innocent. Okay, can you be innocent? Yes, of course you can. But we have arrested you. But now with the methodology and decision-making theory in mind, now we teach our detectives to say, okay, if he is innocent, then there must be an alternative explanation to the fingerprints at the scene of the crime. What may be the alternative explanations? So today we force our detectives prior to the interview to sit down in a team, if it's a serious case, and construct all plausible alternative explanations. What could it be? If you were innocent, there is information pointing towards possible guilt. Yeah, sure. And in the old days, without the knowledge of cognitive psychology and decision-making theories. We did the opposite of how we should have thought. We were trying to confirm our first beliefs by securing confessions. And now we realize that it's like throwing gasoline on fire, feeding the biases with a methodology designed to confirm our beliefs. After you've asked us to go and find who we think it is, and then demand from us that we should continue the investigation objectively. It's absolutely impossible.
What if the opposite were true? How different our lives might be if we asked ourselves that every time we made a decision, or at least the bigger ones anyway. As Asbjorn says, our minds are desperately looking for evidence to confirm our beliefs and opinions. We want to prove that our suspicions are correct, which is why he believes it's so important that police investigators change the way they do things to use the new methods he's immersed himself in. Which is exactly what Asbjorn is turning over in his mind as he drives through the forests towards his first meeting with one of the world's most vicious mass murderers. Eventually, he arrives in Oslo.
So my first task was to gather the team, and then we started interviewing immediately. Now, of course, it was a big operation just to move him from the custody center to the police station. We had to close off all, the streets. Operational police officers took care of that. So we could only concentrate on the face-to-face interpersonal communication with him.
As I'm talking to Asbjorn, he's sitting in the room next door to where that communication with Breivik took place. I asked him to take us into the room and show us more.
So yes, this is where we interview victims, witnesses, and suspects in serious crimes.
You were connected to this room via video link, and Anders Breivik was in this room. It looks like an airport lounge almost.
It is in line with available research on interpersonal communication to have the chairs, equal chairs, 45 degrees, stimulating communication. We have the video cameras, of course, here, and the interviewer will be sitting here, and this is the screen that we can send in questions so that the interviewer will see the question and the witness or suspect will not. I was not in the interview room itself. I, together with police, lawyers, and the rest of the team, were backstage having the video live streamed to us. I was there, I think, for a total of 220 hours over the next 9 months.
220 hours, hour after hour of questioning, focused on making sure the right decisions will get made, faced with a perpetrator whom you know has killed 77 people. Where and how do you start? If you're enjoying our podcast, then you might also enjoy Inspired Sounds from Rathbones, a leading wealth management provider. While the world around is changing, the challenges of growing and selling a successful business remain the same. How might you gain an edge in fundraising? Which business models could you adopt? What does a successful exit look like? Well, that's why I'm recommending you give Inspired Sounds a listen. From building a business empire to fueling your brand journey, Inspired Sounds is dedicated to supporting and empowering entrepreneurs everywhere. Featuring leading business minds such as Moonpig's Nick Jenkins and Absolute Collagen co-founder Darcy Laceby, each episode explores the driving forces behind their success and could help you unlock yours. So, if you're ready for game-changing insights and great conversation, why not decide to make Inspired Sounds your next listen? That's Inspired Sounds, available now on Spotify, Apple, and all good podcast platforms.
In investigative interviewing methodology, the first step of the interview is the planning and preparation. We talk about physical preparations, we talk about case-related preparations, and then we talk about mental preparation. And I can assure you that the most important part of our preparations for the interviews of Breivik was definitely mental preparations. We will treat this case as we treat all other cases. We have a methodology, we have knowledge, we have training, we have experience. So to take ourselves down and not hype ourselves up, because we know from decision-making theory that emotions can lead you astray.
You call him a suspect, but he's as guilty as anything. He's literally got blood on his hands. You know that he did it. There is the outlier threat that there may be other cells that perhaps could be lying low, could be waiting for things to calm down before launching another attack. You have to go through a process with a public that is traumatized, a media that is voracious and wants answers, politicians who are putting huge pressure on you to get an outcome, and you have to stick to the process.
Yeah.
Because if you don't stick to the process, you're not going to achieve the ultimate goal, which is truth. How do you do that?
We had three, should we say, main aims of the interviews. The first one, of course, particularly in the beginning with the ticking bomb scenario, are there more terrorists out there? And if so, who are they and where are they? But in order to answer those questions, the security questions, you need information. There's no other way. So how do we get information? Well, in our case, it's to stimulate the communication with the suspect. And then the second aim, of course, is that we always have a trial on the back of our mind to gather evidence for a criminal trial. And we know that our criminal justice system is no better than the information gathered by the police, how accurate it is, how reliable it is. So that leaves us well deep down in our methodology to ask open-ended questions, to listen. And the third aim was to gather as much detailed information as possible in order to provide the people, and particularly the ones that lost their loved ones. So all these three, should we say, overarching aims of the interviews pointed in the same direction, namely stimulate the communication, ensure that the person we are talking to feels that he is indeed listened to and respected as a human being.
It's a fundamental shift, though, from what we see in the Hollywood movies, from the police dramas, mostly American, where there's slamming of desks and there's shouting and there's pointing of fingers and their lawyers telling the policeman to back off. We all know the dramas, right? But this is a fundamental shift from what you were doing 10 years previously, which was probably quite similar to that, to this astonishing change. We don't judge and we don't moralize. How do you not judge and moralize at a point of the most extraordinary atrocity that has been committed in Norway since the Nazi invasion?
Breivik, or any suspect in any case, we regard him as our key witness. Nobody knows the case better than them. And if they are innocent, they are the key witness to turn the case around. But if they are guilty, they know the case better than anyone. We know from science that those detectives, those interviewers who were able to put in motion the ethos of investigative interviewing or rapport-based interviewing, they were the ones who got the most information. And we knew that if we apply the methodology, if we approach the suspect, no matter what he's suspected of, and communicating empathy, showing him respect as a human being, not respect for what they may or may not have done, and ensure them that we will listen to you. We will secure your human rights and your autonomy. You choose if you want to talk to us or not. So in that way, establish rapport in a way that he feels genuinely that he will be listened to, that he are amongst professionals that will not judge him. It is not the police job to judge or moralize. It is our job to gather as much accurate and reliable information as absolutely possible. So we focused on that.
So often, people who commit crimes, particularly hate crimes, are people who are driven by an ideology. They may be supremely intelligent. They are people who are very good at hiding in plain sight. They probably come across as fairly normal in society. Nobody would suspect that they would do what they do. So therefore, they're good manipulators. And now you're sitting watching a video feed of these interviews. You've got three of your colleagues, highly trained, highly skilled, slowly seeking to extract valuable information. You have to be making so many decisions in that process as to, is he telling the truth? Is he not telling the truth? Is he deliberately misleading? You're not guessing. You're not accepting his word and then going to check later. You're doing the stuff in real time as you go through it.
Absolutely. And a huge part of moving from experience-based interrogations, the confession-driven stuff that we used to do and that most countries still do, unfortunately, is that we don't waste time looking for signs if he's lying or looking up to the left or to the right or picking his nose and all that bullshit things that I was taught when I was a young detective. It was a kind of a sixth sense that you developed only and only if you were experienced. It was not before I came to the University of Liverpool and started to research-based testing police officers, testing psychologists and judges of their ability to distinguish truth from lies through the interpretation of a reading of the body language, etc. It's not possible. We know that through research. Information is the lifeblood of the investigation.
Here's a question. How do we train ourselves to recognize, acknowledge, and manage our biases in the decision-making process? Because that pushes us closer to some kind of greater objectivity, surely.
Having trained and having a methodology would be my answer again. Because if you just go with the flow in your emotions and without any clear, should we say, approach to how to handle these important decisions, then chances are that you will get caught up in the unconscious thought processes that will help you make the most effortless decision. And it is always the one that you had back in your mind. We start searching for information confirming our belief, our opinion immediately. This happens automatically, unconscious. We don't notice it. These unconscious cognitive mechanisms, they are influencing you so much more than you realize. People have now tested decision-making theory in brain scanners, and what they see is that when you are fed information confirming your view of the world, the brain that stimulates, that makes you happy, that's the part of the brain that is active. It feels good to be right. And the opposite, if you receive information disconfirming your view. As police officers, we are not privileged with the opportunity to postpone the decision. We take it later, So that also makes us vulnerable. But you are pointing to perhaps the most problematic situation in which you get caught up in all the uncertainty and you apply methodology and then you hesitate. And the worst decision of all is often that you don't make one. So no, it's not easy. One thing we know about decision making is that pressure is not a friend. One of the things you have to do, slow down, and we use that in investigations also, how to create slow time. Even in the most hectic moments, try to have a methodology reminding you that, hey, slow down a bit. This is an important decision.
Surely there must have been moments, though, where the emotion was so deep and so strong because of the national pain, and that undermines your ability to be as objective as you can.
Yes.
You want to punch the lights out of the person sitting opposite you because you know they did this.
One of our interviewers, Nina, she has openly told on national television that she cried when she came home between the interviews. I did not, and the other interviewers did not. But I can tell you that when I prepared the first lecture about how we interviewed him, and this was after the trial was over. He was convicted. Our job was done. Then I started to present the methodology and how we approach, and then I came to the mental preparations. And then I felt that something happened and there was all these emotions coming, and I realized that, Asbjorn, you are about to cry, man. And then I started to cry, quite intense. So surely something was kept inside, undoubtedly, when the job was done. The newspapers don't write all that much about him anymore, except for occasional upcoming trials in which he tries to be released. Then there will be some news coverage. But other than that, we know who he is, what he did, and we don't need to listen that much more to him anymore. Rather on the contrary.
Perhaps the world doesn't need to listen to Anders Breivk anymore because Asbjørn Rachlew and his team spent hundreds of hours doing it for them and listening in a very particular way, following a methodology that understands that, given free rein, our minds will seek out confirmation of our original beliefs, that simply looking for proof that our suspicions are correct isn't enough, that sees the perpetrator as the most important witness to any crime, that asks, what if the opposite is true? It's a revolutionary approach to one of the biggest decisions society makes, innocent or guilty. But in this case, it wasn't just about that. Because if Asbjorn and his colleagues could do nothing else, they could at least offer a devastated nation insight, real insight, based on the most advanced techniques in the world into the mind of one of the most brutal mass murderers it had ever produced, Asbjørn Rachlew's Art of Deciding. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Art of Deciding. You'll find us on all major podcast platforms, so please click follow so that you don't miss an episode. And please give us a rating and leave a review. Even better, share the link far and wide to help as many people as possible make better decisions. I'm Bruce Whitfield. You can find out more about me on brucewhitfield.com. Till the next time, goodbye.